Good afternoon, good morning. I'm Jason Roski on the KC Auction Company, and today on Behind the Galv with Jason, which we do every week, I'm thrilled to bring on Daniel Mathis with Not a Minimalist. Hi, Daniel. How are you doing today?
Hey, Jason. Good. How are you?
Doing fantastic. And for those of you watching, you have questions, please post them below. But I got to know Daniel through Instagram because he's very active over there. He is on Facebook as well. But Daniel is a reformed minimalist, and he is now not a minimalist. You can tell he's in his home right there with this amazing gallery wall behind him. For those of you don't know Daniel, and he's been this little hobby of posting his pictures of great collections has become into almost a small business of just promoting it. He's been featured in Flea Market Style Magazine, Country Living, Flea Market Home and Living, Lived in Style Magazine. He's been on numerous podcasts and shows like this and has done just some really fun stuff. Daniel, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got into collecting and then what Not a Minimalist is for you and for others?
Okay, sure. Well, yeah. First of all, thanks for the invite to be on. It's fun to talk about to all this stuff, which is just a hobby for me. Well, I've been a collector for as long as I can remember. I mean, it was probably one of the earliest sort of natural inclinations that I had, and I usually tell people that I can remember being in second grade and I enjoyed collecting. So then I had when my family would go on a vacation, I would pick up a key ring from where all of the attractions that we went. And so I started a key ring collection, and then I also had like a rock and fossil collection. So I was collecting pretty early on, and I do think people that really like to do that, at least to the degree that I do, also talk about, having that interest pretty young. And so I do think there's kind of an innate desire to curate and to assemble the collections. And so I always did that. And, my grandmother, and sort of segued into vintage and antiques and things when my grandmother would go take me to garage sales. And so she loved going to garage sales. I think she and I are kind of a kindred spirit in that regard, in terms of just really loving the hunt and sort of accumulating things and curating collections. My mom doesn't have that bug. And so it skipped a generation. But in, growing up, I would pick up funky things for my bedroom. And then that sort of kind of evolved into kind of enjoying, decorating my bedroom pretty young. And then in college, I picked up some stuff for my apartment, and eventually started forming collections. I mean, it just kind of happens by accident, really, for me. I mean, especially if you're, antiquing and thrifting all the time, and you see things from time to time, and you realize there are more of them, and then it kind of dawns on you, okay, this would all look good together. So that has been going on for a long time, and I had, some collections on display in my apartment from time to time, and I really didn't just kind of unleash it until about 10 years ago when I moved in here. And I had moved with my job a few times. And so, as everybody knows, if you move frequently, that is the number one way to become a minimalist and have a desire to purge some things. And so I definitely dabbled in that, but I'm kind of settled now and here in Oklahoma City. And so I just really turned on the hose. I just finally said, okay, I'm just going to have fun with it. And so I just kind of unleashed my, inner collector and pulled out all my collections, and just, I was kind of constantly always waiting for something. It's like, what am I waiting for? Like maybe I'm waiting to buy a house, or I'm waiting to have the perfect thing. And I finally just said, what am I waiting for? And so that I started developing, my displays and things in this apartment. And then I guess 3 years ago it was, Instagram, you started seeing lots of home interior accounts, and it just was a fun place to kind of share what you were doing. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to post. I'm going to make an account for that. And I didn't want to put it on my personal account because I didn't kind of want to force feed that kind of content to my friends. And I wanted it to be people who really just wanted, you know, to see that kind of stuff. And so I was going to create a new account, and I really thought about, you know, what do I want to call the handle, because I know those last a long time, and it kind of needs to be memorable, and it kind of should, you know, inherently describe what you're doing. And it was kind of tongue in cheek, obviously, to pick not a minimalist. And so, but it does describe, you know, my sort of innate nature. I'm not a minimalist. I do enjoy a lot of things around. And so that was, so I came up with that handle, and it kind of stuck, and it is, you know, a little humor involved in it, but it is easy to remember, and people, you know, kind of laugh at it. And so it was just for fun. And so my account's really just purely a hobby, really just my bliss. And it kind of has grown, and that's been fun. And you do connect with a lot of, you know, like-minded collectors and antiquing, you know, people who love to go thrifting. And I also just love to, you know, just to go thrifting and antiquing. It's just part of the fun, is the thrill of the hunt. And so, and so here we are. And so, yeah, I've just been really lucky to have some folks who liked, you know, my photos and kind of the, you know, the design of my home, and have been really lucky to have been invited to be in a few magazines. And so here we are. Yeah, it's kind of, I usually joke and say I'm a lawyer by day, but I'm a collector, you know, by night and day. And because that I do kind of want to do all the time, whereas when I'm working, I do want to leave it when I leave, which you really can't do as a lawyer either. So anyway,
yeah, when that day is done, it's done. When there is no done, there's no done at the end of the day for collecting. Terry, Mona, Brenda, Teresa, Kathy, and others watching, thanks for watching. If you have questions, post them below. We'll try and answer them on our show. And you mentioned a few different things. You started with keychains. To give people an idea of what you collect. And if you want to see what he collects in person, he is very active on Instagram. And it's not a minimalist on Instagram. Looking through, he collects yardsticks, butterflies and insects, yard-long pictures, African textiles, Ozark ware pottery, souvenir plates, tramp art portraits, brass objects, wasps' nests, sewing darners, shells, and tanglers. It's kind of an eclectic mix. You know, a lot of people. What's that?
When you put it like that, when you list it off like that, yeah, it does sound a little disjointed.
And that's not all of it, I'm sure. What most people have, you know, when they collect a very specific thing. You're just kind of whatever pleases you. Tell us about that. And, you know, it reminds me of, you know, Frasier. One of my favorite lines in any show ever is when he's talking to his dad for the very first episodes about his apartment. He said, it's called eclectic. The theory behind it is if you have really fine pieces of furniture, it doesn't matter if they match, they will go together. And that's kind of your collection. Like, you wouldn't think about the different things, like I just mentioned, working in a singular collection together, but they do. So how did you end up collecting so many various and varied objects?
Well, that's a good question. I don't really know how to explain, you know, what appeals to me. It is just kind of a feeling. And, you know, I do kind of have a collection of collections. And I think that's one of the, you know, aspects that has kind of separated what I do from others in some ways, that when I start collecting something, I do see it in the bigger picture of what I have and whether it kind of fits in. And so there is some common thread between them, whether it be color or just, you know, a complementary shape somehow. But how I start, I really don't know. Something, you know, because it's very ironic. One of my collections that I have right here beside me, the collection of Namaji pottery, which is you know, kind of a mid-century tourist pottery that was sold at gas stations around the country. I hated it for a long time, and I saw it at, you know, antique stores and thrift stores and hated it. I say that I hated it so much I eventually started liking it, and I don't know what changed, but I suddenly saw it differently. You know, the swirls, that was the first thing. I'm kind of known for the swirled stuff that I like, but that was the first swirl pop, item that I started collecting. And I think maybe one day I just realized, oh, that would all look really good together. It would look so different together. And there's pieces individually that I don't really love as an individual piece, but as an assemblage, I really did like it. And so I started picking that up. So I don't really know what it is that draws me to something. I do know when I'm looking for new things to collect, or if it's something that I start that's new, it's usually something that I've seen more than once already, right? Like you don't know what's out there at first. And so, is that a one-off thing, or are there others that might be available to collect? And so if I've seen something that kind of intrigues me for a little while, eventually I might bite the bullet and say, okay, I'm in. It's a new thing. I'm gonna start picking those up. And I already know kind of have a little bit of an idea what's out there. And I also depends like on the price and the size, where would I put it? Is it affordable? I like to, when people ask about how to collect, and I used to encourage my friends that would go, antiquing with me, hey, we need to find you something to collect, because it makes the shopping so much more fun to have something that you're looking for always, in addition to kind of the funky things that you might pick up to put in.
Come across, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I do. I mean, I'm always looking for, a few of the things that I collect, and then I'm also attracted to kind of one-off things. I mean, some of my gallery wall has a lot of one-off things, and I do like to pick up the unusual or kind of interesting things to put in as well. And like when I was in country living for the tourist plates, I had seen those forever, and I was trying not to buy them ever because I really didn't want to collect them necessarily. And then just 1 week after, I liked them, I also could see them in a group. Like I could envision kind of they would look cool in a group, and they were clearly something that was generally pretty cheap. People are ignoring them, and that also makes for a good potential item to collect. Is if people are ignoring it, it's not currently trendy. You might be on trend in the future, or if you can figure out an interesting way to display it, and then suddenly everyone's like, oh wow, that would look good. And so it's kind of fun to cultivate something new that people have been ignoring because they can't see it in an interesting display. And that usually means that they're going to be cheap and they're going to be more prevalent. And so you kind of have the pick of the litter when you find when you're kind of on the front end of the wave like that. But for those, I mean, one weekend I went to an estate sale, and it was kind of the last day, and they had like 20 tourist plates there, and the lady was like, hey, you can have them all for $5. And I was like, okay, well, I guess we're doing it. So I all of a sudden I had 20, and then I literally went to another estate sale, and there were 10 for just almost nothing. And then the next one had like 10. I was like, okay, in one day I've got 40 tourist plates. And so then I'm in. It's like, okay, now I'm in. Now I've broken the seal, and I'm going to start watching for interesting ones, and then it's a matter of kind of building your collection in a diverse way, trying to find different sizes, different colors, add in particular states that you just happen to like or have visited, things like that. And so that's kind of how that happened. And then some of my collections, I mean, I have committed to, and I have been collecting for many years. I mean, I have some mid-century McCoy pottery that's in storage, and I've been collecting that for 20 years. And I still pick up a piece. So I'm a committed long haul collector who does kind of have an end goal in mind in terms of how it will look or might be displayed, and then I just don't deviate. Now there's a few things that I've started, and then I like wane from. I'm like, okay, well maybe I don't want to continue that for now, or I'll put it away for a little while and then maybe bring it back out and start adding to it. Because then it is an issue. Like some of the viewers may, if they follow me, they may know that I bought a house. We talked a little bit about that earlier. And so I'll be able to put some of my collections on display in a different way, and also show some new things that I've never displayed. But one of the things I think about is how will they all look together? And I do want the whole house to kind of have a complementary feel and for it to kind of work together and to not be too busy. I mean, you can have a maximalist space that is appealing to the eye and not, I mean, that's one of the things my friends and people who come over say. They're like, oh my gosh, there's so much stuff in here, but it doesn't feel overwhelming necessarily. And I think, but one of the tricks with collections, especially small, collections that are many small pieces, is I keep them all together. And so my pottery collections, each is displayed together. It becomes kind of at least to me, kind of a single installation, as opposed to scattering it all around the room. You don't really know where to look. It's a little hard for your eye to settle. And so that's one of the things I just kind of naturally did, was group them together so that they feel more like a singular item. Anyway, so I don't know. Back to your original question. I really don't know why it's such a diverse smattering of things. There's usually something that appeals to me about the items, whether it's the way they feel as to pottery, or the colors, or maybe it's,
it just appeals to you at some point for some reason. Yeah.
And there's really no, it's just more of a feeling for me. There's not really a whole lot of science behind it.
Yeah. Well, I love what Diane Burton just wrote. Diverse collections displayed together make me think of an inside-out crazy quilt. It makes the home feel fun and cozy. Thanks, Diane. I know you were in St. Louis watching us, and then Kathy, who's on in San Antonio, loves your collections and how you display them, and I think we all agree with that. You touched on so many things in that answer there, Daniel. One of the things I want to talk about, though, and I've noticed, and I've been in the business of buying and selling in the auction business for, 30 plus years. And my mother drugged me to garage sales. So I got the bug from my mother, who drugged my brother and I to garage sales as kids. And we could either sit in the hot car and complain, or go into the sale and try and get something bought. Namaji pottery, little brass oddballs and ends, things like that. A lot of what you collect is very reasonable, affordable, and even cheap, like those tourist plates. But some of the other things, like the tramp art, is somewhat pricey. How do you balance, and do you have a price point that you won't spend past? Or is it just, if the piece speaks to you, it doesn't matter? Tell us a little bit about collecting on a budget, I think, is part of that. And then what are you looking for as far as affordability? And is that a real big factor or not?
Yeah, no, that's definitely a good thing. Well, I mean, as I said before, touched on a minute ago, when you're starting a collection, you can definitely look for things that people are ignoring or are widely available, and that generally makes them more affordable. And I have definitely, I'm always looking for a bargain, for sure, and that's part of the fun, I think, of the hunt. And so I have paid, for some of my, I'll take the Ozark tourist pottery as an example. It's gotten very collectible. It's probably one of the more expensive potteries of that sort of genre, and it can be in the hundreds, multiples of hundreds of dollars for a single piece. If you look on eBay, it's hard to find a piece for less than a couple $100 lately. But I have found those for $5, and I have found, and I will pay, and I have paid several $100s for those pieces. But I haven't always had that kind of budget, and so you just keep looking, and if you have a particular, like almost everything I collect has pieces that run the gamut of price point, because you can find pieces that are pretty common, and then there's almost always a rare piece, and the rare piece will bring more money. So in the beginning, you focus on the pieces that are more prevalent, and you build it that way. It's more fun to kind of look for, the dark corners of the antique malls and just see if somebody has priced a piece for a steal, and that makes it fun. And then if it becomes a collection that you've committed to and you really like it and it stands the test of time and you've got it 5 or 6 years later, maybe then splurge on a really marquee piece to kind of complete your collection. And that's often what I do. I will watch for, I don't go straight in and buy, the most rare piece of something. And then build the other direction. I don't do that. I usually have always started like, I have a matte white McCoy pottery collection. Actually, kind of expanded to just matte white mid-century pottery. And when I first started collecting that, I wouldn't pay more than $10 for any piece. If it was more than $10, I felt like that was a splurge. And that was 15 or 20 years ago when I first started. And I would look for the dollar, pieces that were $1 or $2. And if I paid 10, it needed to be odd or really special, because that felt like a splurge. Well, now I'll pay a lot more for pieces. Number one, I'm at a different place in my life, and so I have a bigger budget. But also, I have probably a couple thousand pieces, and so it is now more about completing the collection. And so I feel like it's a little more defensible to splurge. But yeah, I mean, there's things you can collect in every budget, and I don't. And so I think, it's, as I said, once you go to a few places and something catches your eye more than once, it's probably a good candidate for starting that. But yeah, but I do have items like you said, tramp art. I loved that for years and didn't really buy much of it because it wasn't really within my budget. In the last few years, it's been more within my budget, and I started buying some pieces, and you can still find them affordable. In fact, I think the piece that I was in Kansas. I drove up to Wichita from Oklahoma City, and I was at an antique mall there, and I had a couple of small tramp art pieces, nothing fancy, but I came across this really awesome frame, huge and in almost perfect condition. And I don't know, it was maybe $120, which for that I knew at that point was a good deal. And that's the other thing to think about, is that you want to slowly delve into items that are more expensive, because in the beginning you may not know if the price is right. And so you don't want to overpay for something. And so if you're going to splurge on things, you probably want to take some time and get educated about what they are and the condition, and whether you're paying, kind of market. And as Jason, I mean, antiques and things the prices go up and down over the years, right? And
absolutely,
and I don't really know where we are I know some things are up and then some things are down in comparison to years past. But I don't really have limits. I mean, everyone has limits of your financial strength, but I don't have hard limits. And if it hits me just right, and it's a really amazing piece that is something that I collect, right now in my life, I would probably splurge for it, because it is something that I'm not just dabbling in. It's something that I'm going in, I'm doing it full force. I don't want to do anything. I never do anything halfway. And so these collections, I don't do halfway. I don't want to fool around with just, I'm going full in on some of these. And so it's a fun thing, a fun hobby. And clearly now is kind of probably going to define my life in some ways that, people will hopefully I'm going to be here a lot longer, but I think I've been doing this long enough that probably it will contribute to my legacy as a collector, that because of, the things that I've collected over my friends and I usually joke and say, well, somebody's going to love our estate sale one day. And,
right.
And I love going to estate sales, and I'm sure my estate will have one someday. And so the fun will continue.
Absolutely, for somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple of things you mentioned there. I think the learning the collections by slowly dipping your toe in the water, by buying those nominally priced pieces, $1, $2, $10, you can't make a mistake there, because even if you do, it's less than a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
And you learn. The best way to learn what something's worth is by touching it, seeing it, and talking to the vendors at flea markets and antique malls and things like that to learn the differences between different things. And like I said, Ozark pottery is a perfect example. 10 years ago, the big pots were $30, $40, and $50, and now the big pots are $300, $400, and $500.
Yeah.
And so the markets definitely do adjust and change over time. What is your what's the biggest regret you've had? Like you went and saw a piece, you're like, oh, you were on the fence and you didn't. And like for days, weeks afterwards, like I should have bought that piece.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of those lately because I've learned over the years the importance of getting it when you see it. Right. So the last 5 or 6 years, I don't have a lot of. I do have one though that comes to mind, and it was an Ozark pottery piece that was on eBay. It was giant. I mean, it was an anomaly in the sense that it's probably 3 or 4 feet tall, a huge pot, and it wasn't even that expensive because, you know, you can size yourself out of being marketable. Like some of the pieces, even though it's odd, practically speaking, it's not appealing to a lot of people because it's too hard to incorporate into what you're doing, and it just doesn't fit. But I watched it on eBay for a while, and then actually someone that I follow on Instagram that's a fellow Ozark pottery collector, he ended up snagging it, and I did regret not going for that, and I would have had to, you know, drive. I think it was in Kansas too. I would have had to drive, you know, a day trip, get it, spend the night, come back. It's really too big to ship, and I was, you know, just on the fence about it. So I do regret that. So every now and then something comes along that I miss, but that's one of the things you learn pretty quick. If you want it, you need to get it. It's gonna be gone. That's even true like when you walk in the door of an antique mall or a store. If you see it in the front, and you think, I'll pick that up on the way out, it'll be gone. That's happened to me a number of times, and then you're like, gosh, what was I thinking? But I don't do that anymore. I've learned my lesson there, and if I leave it, I know I'm gonna be okay if it's gone. Because that's just the way life works. It's going to be gone if you leave it and want it.
Yeah, no, it's true. Especially when you talk about going to estate sales, you walk past it, you don't think twice, you just grab it and go, or else the next person will grab it and you won't have a chance to again.
Always put it.
Yeah, you can always walk around with it for a few minutes, put it back
if you change your mind.
Yeah. What is something you can't pass up when you're in an antique mall or a estate sale? You walk past it. I mean, you have all these collections, but what's something that you still like? You see, like, that's what's the heart stopper for you? Well,
I mean, we're talking, you know, Ozark pottery to death, but that is something I have trouble passing because it is so hard to find, particularly in the wild, as they say. I'm also lately. I've been buying a lot of brass. I do have trouble passing brass. That was another thing that I resisted buying for a while, and I don't know what changed, but suddenly I'm buying brass, and so I do have trouble passing brass up. And even like brass candle holders, like I have a pretty big assortment of brass candle holders, which are actually something that you can get pretty cheap. People kind of ignore them; they're really prevalent, but I get so many comments on the grouping of them that I have together with black candles, and it's very striking as an image. And so those I'm still like grabbing because I do have an idea of how I want to change that display in my new house. So what else? I don't know. I mean, kind of on the opposite side of that, it's weird. Sometimes you'll just not be in the mood for something that you collect. And that sounds weird, but I will be at places and I'll see something that I should buy, and for whatever reason I'm just not in the mood and I won't get it. And it's not necessarily a regret, but then I do look back and think, why didn't I just get that? Like, it wasn't expensive, but it's usually because it's something that I either I'm feeling just particularly exhausted with managing the collection that day, and so it's just like I don't I just want to enjoy like browsing and not having to have the management side of changing where I'm, working it into the display, because it's work when you get a lot high volume. So that's kind of a funny twist that sometimes I'll be, it also depends on how much I've found that day. Like if I found a lot of interesting things and then I see 2 things that are super cheap and that I collect, sometimes I'll just be fatigued. You just get a little bit of shopping fatigue and you're just like, I can't load another thing in the car today, so I'm just gonna let that go. Which is fun, seems it's definitely counterintuitive and a little ironic, especially if you're a collector, but that does happen too.
Yeah, you can only buy so much, no matter how much you want to. There comes a point on a daily, weekly, monthly, annual basis, you're like, wow, I just need to sit home and rest and breathe for a little bit.
Right. And just to enjoy what you have. And I have to remind myself of that from time to time, where I'm like, okay, look, you've gotten hung up in the accumulating mode, the hunt mode, the finding another one mode, which is fun, but I'll have to remind myself, okay, you need to stop and deal with what you've got, enjoy your space, rekindle just the joy that comes with having the items. And so then I'll shift back and do that for a while. And so I think that's an important thing to remember too, especially, we joke about the distinction between collecting and hoarding, and obviously hoarding is a serious mental disorder. So I don't mean to make light of that, but from the perspective of just, curating collections, it requires work and commitment outside of just the accumulation piece or just the finding stuff piece. And, just putting my pottery displays together or working on this gallery wall. I mean, it could take all day. If I move one thing on this wall, it takes me all day just about to reshuffle what needs to be reshuffled. Probably because I'm so anal about the spacing, but
right.
So there's the ownership and the ownership aspect of collections.
Yeah, and I think part of the being anal about and focused on the spacing keeps it from being a hoard into the collector realm, right? If you just start stacking it and just putting it willy nilly, then it's not a collection anymore. It is like you said, it becomes a mental health issue or concern. But when you take the time it has a place. It doesn't seem like you talked about friends coming over and not feeling overwhelmed necessarily, because your eye has a place to go and focus. And so it does make a big difference in the long term of it. Oh, Kathy, let's see what she says. Do you fine tune your collections, keep some, sell some of some? How do you go about that? That's a great question, Kathy. So yeah, what do you do with pieces? Like you said, you get tired of buying. There's things we all get tired of having. Do you move them on, or they end up in a box in storage?
Well, but a little both.
Both.
I definitely have some stuff in storage. I do switch things out. I mean, I've made changes. I sort of consider my gallery wall a little bit of a collection, even though it's a collection of framed things. I do make changes. If I find something that I like better, I'll rotate it in. Some of the things that I've taken out of the gallery wall, I either still have because I can't quite let go of them, but I have sold a few things, especially actually I really started during the pandemic. I had when was home all the time, and so I was making some changes here and there just for fun. And I had some more contemporary framed insects, let's say, for example, that I had on a wall, and then I found the collection of vintage ones that I have displayed now. And then somebody in Washington, at Nanny and Nell on Instagram, reached out to me about these really amazing teaching specimens from the 20s, 30s that are insects. And I was like, I can't have 3 insect collections. And so I kept the 2 old ones and I sold the newer set. So I have sold a few things. I don't sell much at all. Honestly, I just don't have time. And I can't have a garage sale where I live right now. But if when I move to the house, and if the neighborhood has a garage sale, then I will have a garage sale. And I am able to let things go. And especially when I'm I'm actually getting ready for a photo shoot in here later in the month, and I'm decluttering, and so I will get to a point where I'm like, okay, that has to go, and so I do reach a point where I let things go. But it's in terms of some of my it is important to edit, and I do edit my apartment. I edit the collections less than I edit how things appear in my apartment. And so I'll bring something in and I'll put it in. And if I walk through like after work and it like something sticks out, that doesn't feel right. And so I do move things around, and I move things around a little more frequently probably than people realize, because you'd never know. You'd never notice the change if you came over from one time to the other. It's a little bit of a Where's Waldo with my friends, because they see something new every time they come over. But yeah, I do edit. I think that's important. And it's kind of never finished. I mean, for me, it's never finished. I don't have any collections that I think that are done. Maybe the white pottery collection, when I get it out, and I have plans to display it in the new house. And when I do that, I might actually feel that that's done, because that's been such a long-term commitment.
Right.
And I do have, I think at that point it would only be adding super rare pieces that I don't have. And otherwise I might say, okay, that one's done.
Yeah. Well, I got to thank Diane. Diane's a good client, customer, and friend of the company. When you're ready to sell things, send the KC Auction Company. Thanks, Diane. I appreciate the ad for us right there. That's awesome. Well, Daniel, we actually talked a long time about all kinds of things. You touched on a lot of things I didn't. For those of you watching, again, thank you so much for joining us today on Behind the Gavel with Jason. You can always get a hold of us at info@kcauctioncompany.com. Phone us at 816-283-3633. And of course, kcauctioncompany.com is our website. Daniel, before we leave, I like to give my guests a final couple of minutes to just talk about anything that's important to you in regards to what we were talking about today that we didn't talk about. Whether it's refining collections, whether it's the place to look. But I like to give it because the conversation was kind of driven by me and what I thought we should talk about. So I'd like to give you a minute or two to just kind of talk about anything in regards to it.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, I don't know that I have too much more to add to that. I mean, maybe in terms of describing kind of what I do. I mean, I've realized over the last couple of years, when people will ask me about, your style, or questions that I really never thought about, because I'm not a designer by trade. I've realized it's just my art. This is my art, and it's purely for fun. It's really my bliss. If there's any talent involved, it's probably one of the few things that I was sort of naturally, that I'm naturally able to do. But it's really just about having fun for me, and so I think it's how I express myself. And I can't draw a picture to save my life, but I can envision the displays that I have before I put them up. And so that's how I would describe it. It's just something I love to do. It's my art. It's the way I express myself. It's just a hobby that's kind of growing into something that's a little more than a hobby, which is fine too. But anyway, yeah.
And you talk about it like it's your art, the way you talk about editing and fixing and doing things like that. You definitely talk about it as if you talked about installation and things like that and curating. You do talk about it more along the lines of it's a larger thing. It's not individual pieces. And Diane, condition, how important is it? That sounds like a 30 or 40 minute conversation.
Well, it could be. Yeah, I'll just say really quickly, I am a condition snob. I want it to be in good condition. For pottery, I don't buy pottery with chips or cracks unless it is super rare. So it's important to me. It depends on the scarcity or the uniqueness. I mean, obviously, I had things that are weathered and worn, but condition is important to me personally. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is for most, like you said, rare, unusual pieces. The condition factor is less important, but it's still there.
Yeah.
Thank you again for joining me today, Daniel. Next week, I'll be joined by Rob Delahater from the Lost Art Salon out in San Francisco. We're going to be talking about, he has a really cool business. It's an art gallery, but they kind of focus and specialize in artists who maybe didn't receive the recognition that they should have while they were creating and executing their artwork, which is something we love. We've sold a lot of artists to the States, some that were known, others that were not known at all. And it's kind of interesting. I'm excited to talk to him next week about that. Daniel, have a great weekend. Good luck with the move and the renovations on the new house.
Okay, thank you.
I can't wait to see what happens there. And thanks everybody for watching. Have a great weekend. Talk to you soon.